Hi, and welcome to a new video. Today we're going to be looking at some different metal chloride solutions burning, like what you can see here. So nothing at all complicated, literally just some pretty colors. So what's burning is essentially a wooden splint, which has been soaked in a solution of a certain metal chloride. And as you probably know if you're watching this, some different metals, especially transition metals for example, can produce some very pretty colors. And as you can see, for the heating element, I just used an ordinary Bunsen burner, pretty rudimentary. So let's continue on to the video. To start off, I didn't use a metal chloride, just the distilled water. This was simply as a control to see that the water, of course, doesn't produce any flames, so it won't pollute the results of the actual metal chlorides burning. Of course, there is a little bit of yellowish fire coming from the stick itself burning later on, but that's distinguishable from the metal fire. So now let's move on to the actual metal chlorides burning, starting out with the metal strontium, which produces very bright and vivid red flames, as you can see here. Much more red than what you get from just a wood fire. It looks much more washed out on camera than it does in person, as the camera doesn't really pick up the colors of the fire too well. And that is something that I'll point out a bit later on in the video. So next up on the list is sodium, of course in the form of sodium chloride, which is a pretty vivid color as well, but this time much more on the yellow side from what a typical wood fire would be. It also seemed to burn a little bit more than the stick on its own would, but that seemed to be probably just because the stick initially was covered in water. Now next up is one that I think looks pretty cool and unique, copper chloride. As you can see here, it burns a really neon green, which I think is really interesting to see in a fire. And that's pretty much the only reason, honestly. I just think green fire equals cool, I guess. So yeah, the fire of course is the same greenish color as a lot of other copper compounds are. Alright, so next up is one that I would say is probably my absolute favorite out of all the ones on this list. And that one is lithium. I just think that lithium chloride burning is an absolutely gorgeous type of fire. And here is where I bring back some little complaints about the camera. Of course, it really doesn't even come close to doing the lithium justice. As you can see here, the flames are a pretty vivid magenta sort of color. However, it's just so much deeper and more vivid and more magenta in person, and it's just, the camera just does not capture a lot of that very well at all. Not a major complaint, it's just not a great camera, just something I thought is worth mentioning since this just, again, isn't really what it looks like in person. So because I think it looks so cool, here's just under a minute of a cool lithium burning sort of montage thing. So now that you've made it through all that lithium fire, here's our next metal up, cesium. And compared to lithium especially, cesium is just really disappointing, to be honest. The fire of cesium is very subtly sort of purplish, so it's of course pretty similar to the fire of the gas itself. And it's very dim to begin with, and of course pretty hard to see in person, so let alone seeing it on camera. So yeah, the only visible fires in this bit are just the stick starting to burn towards the end. So next up is a just very slightly less underwhelming one, potassium. Potassium is a little more purplish red and a little bit less subtle than cesium was. Overall though, it's still fairly similar to the color of the gas fire and pretty hard to see on camera, although you can see it a little bit if you look closely. Although, of course, it's no copper or lithium. So getting back to the more interesting ones again, next up is the element calcium. Of course, in a chloride form, as all of these have been. And as you can see, calcium has very bright orangey red flames, which are, of course, much more exciting than the previous two have been. And they're very reminiscent of the Strontium fires from the beginning of the video. And it being so similar to Strontium, there's really not much new to say about it. And I think that's a pretty good one to end on, being that it actually looks nice. Making this video, I think, was really fun, so I hope you had just as much enjoyment from watching it, and maybe even learned a thing or two. But for me, that's about it for today, and bye.